My husband announced his divorce from me on stage at a business awards ceremony in front of hundreds of people, his arm around his mistress's waist, as if she were a trophy. He pointed directly at me, his voice icy. "You no longer belong here. Get out." I stood up, trembling, tears streaming down my face. Exactly the scene he wanted to see. He thought he had just gotten rid of a useless wife. 5 minutes later, a man stepped up and snatched the microphone from his hand. I wiped away my tears, stopped trembling, and walked onto the stage, not to leave, but to bury him. "I don't know how to thank you enough for being here. Your presence means everything." Before we continue, please let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? Which country or city? I'd love to know who's joining me on this journey. Note: some details are fictional for storytelling purposes. Any similarity to names or places is unintentional, but the message remains powerful. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not 6 months ago. 8 years ago. Boston 2016. My name is Natalie Winters. I'm 36 years old and I'm an investment analyst. At least that's what my business card says. What it doesn't say is that I'm also pretty good at spotting patterns, which numbers tell the truth, which ones are hiding something where the risk actually lives in a deal that looks too good to be true. It's funny how I spent years analyzing other people's investments and completely missed the red flags in my own marriage. Or maybe I just didn't want to see them. Love makes you stupid that way. I met Brandon Reed at a tech networking mixer in Cambridge. Fall of 2016. One of those events where everyone's drinking craft beer and pretending they're not desperately trying to make connections that might change their lives. I was 28, working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm, still figuring out what I was doing with my life. I'd just lost my grandmother 2 months earlier, the woman who raised me after my parents divorced when I was 12. She left me everything. She had an inheritance worth millions that would change everything, but I was still too numb from grief to really process what that meant. Brandon was 31. He had this energy about him that filled a room, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way that made you lean in when he talked. He was a startup founder building some kind of software solution for mid-sized companies. I didn't really understand what it did, honestly, but I understood the passion in his voice when he explained it, the way his eyes lit up, the way he made it sound like he was going to change the world, and maybe he actually believed it. Most guys at those events either ignored me or talked at me. Brandon actually listened. He asked questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested in what I thought about market trends and valuation models. When I made a joke about depreciation schedules, he laughed, really laughed, not that polite chuckle people give when they're just waiting for their turn to talk. We got married a year later. Small ceremony, just close friends and family. His mother wanted something bigger, more expensive, but we pushed back. We wanted simple, intimate, real. For the first few years, we were good. Better than good. We'd cook dinner together on Sunday nights, take weekend trips up to Portland or down to the Cape, stay up late talking about the future we were going to build. Brandon's company was growing slowly but growing. I was moving up at my firm, learning the business, making a name for myself. We felt like a team, like we were in it together. But somewhere around year 4, things started shifting. Brandon's company landed its first major contract, $10 million over 3 years. Suddenly, he was getting invited to speak at conferences. TechCrunch wrote a profile about him. Boston Business Journal put him on their 40 under 40 list. And with each new milestone, each new accolade, I watched him change. He started believing his own press, started talking about my vision instead of our plan, started spending more time at networking events and less time at our dinner table. The man who used to ask about my day stopped asking. The man who used to kiss me goodbye in the morning started leaving before I woke up. I told myself it was normal. That's what marriage is when you're in your 30s, right? The butterflies fade. The passion settles into something quieter, more comfortable. You become roommates who happen to share a bed. Except we weren't even really roommates anymore. 6 months ago, May 2024, I started noticing the signs I'd been too comfortable or too scared to see before. His phone, which used to sit casually on the kitchen counter, was always face down now. Password protected, which he said was because of new security protocols at work. He started coming home late on Wednesdays and Fridays, always with the same excuse: client dinners, investor meetings, team drinks. And then there was the name that kept appearing in our conversations with uncomfortable frequency: Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa from business development had a great idea in the meeting today. Vanessa thinks we should target younger enterprise clients. Vanessa's presentation really impressed the board. I'm an analyst. I noticed patterns. I started counting 19 times. In 4 days, my husband mentioned another woman's name 19 times, and every time he said it, there was this warmth in his voice that he didn't use when he talked about me anymore. That's when I knew something had fundamentally shifted. I could have confronted him, could have demanded answers, insisted on couples therapy, made him choose. That's what most women would do, right? That's what my mother did when my father cheated, cried, begged, tried to fix something that was already broken. But I'm not most women. And then I overheard something that changed everything. Brandon was on a call with his PR team in his home office. I was walking past the door. He didn't know I was there. "Yeah, about the company narrative going forward," he said, voice crisp and businesslike. "I need you to minimize Natalie in any press materials. She's not part of the story. The story is about me, my vision, my leadership, my success." Got it. I stood outside that door frozen, listening to my husband erase me from the very company I'd helped him build. Not that he knew that part yet, but we'll get to that. That's when I knew this wasn't just distance. This wasn't just a rough patch or a midlife crisis or whatever comfortable label I'd been trying to put on it. This was erasure. Brandon Reed had decided I was no longer useful to the narrative of his success. I was just the boring wife in the background, the one who counted numbers while he changed the world. So I started counting something else. I counted how many times he lied about where he was. I counted the hotel charges that appeared on our credit card statement. I counted the days until I would be ready to do what needed to be done. 19 times in 4 days. That number became my reminder the moment I stopped being the supportive wife and started being the woman who would take back everything that was hers. But first, I needed to tell you a secret. A secret that Brandon never discovered, even though it was hiding in plain sight for 8 years. A secret that would change everything when the time came to walk away. Because when Brandon told me I didn't belong in his world, he forgot one crucial detail: it wasn't his world at all. It was mine. 7 years ago, October 2017. Brandon came home defeated. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and a salad, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. We'd been married for just 3 weeks. The engine cut off, but he didn't come inside right away. I watched through the window as he sat there in the driver's seat for 5 full minutes, forehead pressed against the steering wheel. When he finally walked through the door, I could see it written all over his face. The meeting hadn't gone well. They said no, he said, dropping his bag on the floor. All of them. Every single VC firm I pitched. He sank onto the couch and I sat down next to him, taking his hand. What did they say? Not enough traction, not enough market validation, not enough proof that anyone actually wants what we're building. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. One guy actually told me to come back when I have real numbers, whatever that means. How much do you need? 4.2 million. He said it like he was confessing to a crime. To survive the next 18 months, hire the team we need. Build out the product properly, 4.2. Might as well be 400 million. I don't have it. The company's going to die, Nat. Everything I've worked for. I didn't say anything right away, just held his hand and let him sit with it. What Brandon didn't know, what I hadn't told him yet, was that 2 months earlier my grandmother had passed away. She'd raised me after my parents split, had been more of a mother to me than my own. And when she died, she left me everything. The house she'd owned in Vermont, fully paid off, her investment accounts, her savings. When the lawyers finished settling the estate, the number came to $4.2 million. Almost exactly what Brandon needed. I could have told him right then. Could have said, I have the money. Let me invest. We'll do this together. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he'd been talking lately about his vision and his company. Maybe it was the subtle shift I'd started noticing in how he introduced me at networking events. This is my wife, Natalie, instead of, this is Natalie, she's brilliant with numbers. Maybe it was just instinct. I wanted to know who Brandon would become if he thought he'd made it on his own. If success came, would he still be the man who'd listen to me talk about depreciation schedules? Or would he become someone else entirely? So I made a different choice. The next day, I called Daniel Morrison. We'd gone to Columbia Business School together, stayed loosely in touch over the years. He'd gone into venture capital, made a name for himself, and was now managing partner at a fund called Apex Capital. "Danny," I said when he picked up, "I need your help with something a little unconventional." We met for coffee in downtown Boston 2 days later. I explained the situation, Brandon's startup, the funding he needed, my inheritance. "You want to invest," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "I want to invest anonymously, through your fund, as a silent partner." He leaned back, studying me. "Why not just give him the money directly?" "Because I need to know something." I stirred my coffee, choosing my words carefully. "I need to know if he'll treat me differently when he thinks I'm just his wife versus when he thinks I'm his investor. Does that make sense?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "It makes perfect sense. And honestly, it's smarter than most investments I see. You're doing due diligence on your own marriage." We structured it carefully. Apex Capital would be the official investor of record. Daniel would act as trustee, managing my investment through various shell entities to protect my anonymity. Brandon would know only that a mysterious angel investor believed in his vision enough to bet $4.2 million on it. The paperwork took 3 weeks. Brandon spent that time getting quieter, more withdrawn, convinced his dream was dying. When Daniel's firm finally called with the term sheet, Brandon practically cried on the phone. I was sitting right next to him when he signed the documents. Watched him initial every page, promise to use the funds responsibly, swear he'd make this investor proud. He kept saying, "I can't believe someone believes in us this much. I won't let them down." I smiled and said, "I know you won't." What he didn't know was that I'd added one more condition to the deal: Reed Tech would grow organically without outside venture capital. No more funding rounds that would dilute my ownership. The company would bootstrap, reinvest its profits, stay lean and scrappy. Brandon loved that idea. Thought it made him a visionary, building something sustainable instead of chasing unicorn valuations. He had no idea I was protecting my majority stake. And I did protect it, carefully, strategically. In 2019, when the company hit a rough patch and needed an injection of capital, a strategic investor appeared with $1.8 million, another one of my shell companies. Brandon celebrated securing the funding. I celebrated maintaining control. In 2021, when 2 early angel investors wanted to cash out their small stakes, I bought them out through yet another entity, paid $2.5 million for their combined 16%. Brandon thought it was great news that serious investors were buying in. I knew it meant I'd just consolidated my ownership from 52% to 68%. By 2024, Reed Tech was valued at $75 million. Brandon owned 32%. He thought he was worth about $24 million on paper. I owned 68%. I was worth $51 million, and he had absolutely no idea. Over 8 years, I'd quietly pumped in an additional $4.3 million through different entities' investments that looked like they came from various sophisticated sources, but all traced back to me. Every funding round, Brandon celebrated every investor meeting. He stressed over every corporate decision he thought he was making independently. I was behind all of it. I was. Brandon thought he'd built an empire through his brilliance and determination. And maybe he had in part. He was smart, driven, charismatic. But the foundation he'd built it on, that was mine. The capital that let him take risks, hire talent, weather storms, mine. The voting power that let him act like a king, it was mine all along. He just didn't know it yet, but he would. Soon enough, at a gala in front of 300 people, when a man in a $1,000 suit would walk up to a microphone and call me boss, Brandon would finally understand what I'd known all along. The empire he'd been bragging about for 8 years wasn't his. It was mine. It had always been mine. And I was about to take it back. 6 months ago, May 2024, I started noticing the signs every wife dreads. Actually, that's not quite true. I'd been noticing things for months before that: small shifts, subtle changes in the rhythm of our marriage. But May was when the pattern became undeniable. when the data points I'd been mentally cataloging crystallized into something I couldn't ignore anymore. Brandon started coming home late on Wednesdays and Fridays. Not every week at first, but enough that I noticed the pattern. Always with the same explanation: client dinners, investor meetings, team drinks. The words changed, but the script stayed the same. Don't wait up, he'd text around 6, running late with a prospective client. He'd walk through the door around 10 or 11 smelling like wine and something else, something floral and expensive that definitely wasn't my perfume. He'd head straight for the shower, claiming he felt grimy from restaurant air, from shaking hands all evening, from the smoke on the patio, where deals supposedly got closed. I watched it all with the same analytical eye I'd use reviewing a suspicious financial statement, looking for the discrepancies, the numbers that didn't quite add up. His phone became a locked fortress, password protected, which he claimed was due to new security protocols at work. Always face down on the nightstand, the kitchen counter, the coffee table. He'd check it compulsively during dinner, during the rare dinners we still had together, and I'd watch his expression shift. The slight smile, the quick glance at me to see if I'd noticed, the way he'd angle his body away when he typed, physically shielding whatever conversation he was having from my view. Then there was the name that started appearing in our conversations with uncomfortable frequency: Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa from business development had a great insight in the strategy meeting today. Vanessa thinks we should pivot our enterprise pitch. Vanessa's presentation really impressed the board. You know, she's only 28 and already a VP. Really talented. I started counting. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I'm an analyst. I notice patterns. I track data. 19 times. In 4 days, my husband mentioned another woman's name 19 times. And every single time he said it, there was this warmth in his voice, this energy that he didn't use when he talked to me anymore. Most wives would panic at this point, would confront their husband, demand answers, check his phone while he's in the shower, hire a private investigator. I've seen it happen to friends, watch them unravel while their marriages disintegrated. But I'm not most wives. I'm an investment analyst. I analyze risk. I calculate returns. I plan exits. And I don't make emotional decisions based on incomplete data. So I did what I do best. I investigated. I Googled her first, found her LinkedIn profile in about 30 seconds. Vanessa Sterling, 28 years old, VP of Business Development at Reed Tech Solutions, Stanford undergraduate, Harvard, MBA, professional headshot that looked like it belonged in a magazine, blonde, polished, ambitious, written all over her face. Her profile listed skills like strategic partnerships and market expansion and executive leadership. She was beautiful, young, accomplished. Everything I wasn't, or at least everything Brandon seemed to think I wasn't anymore. I scrolled through her posts, lots of inspirational quotes about female leadership and breaking glass ceilings. Photos from company events where she stood just a little too close to Brandon, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing at something that apparently wasn't funny enough to share with the rest of the team. Then I found the receipt. I wasn't snooping, not really. Brandon had left his jacket draped over a kitchen chair, and when I went to hang it up, a folded piece of paper fell out of the pocket. Dinner for 2 at the Atlantic Room, one of Boston's most expensive restaurants. $340. 2 entrees, 2 desserts, a bottle of wine that cost more than our monthly water bill. The date, a Wednesday in mid-May. The same Wednesday he'd texted me that he'd be late for a client dinner. I stood there in our kitchen holding that receipt and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later, I suppose, in those quiet moments when I let myself feel things instead of analyze them. No, what I felt was clarity. My husband was having an affair, or at the very least he was well on his way to having one. And I had a choice to make. I could confront him, cry, yell, demand explanations, force him to choose between me and whatever was happening with Vanessa Sterling. Beg him to remember who we used to be back when we were partners instead of strangers who shared an address. Or I could do something smarter. That night, after Brandon came home late yet again and disappeared into his shower, I sat in my home office staring at Vanessa's LinkedIn profile on my laptop screen. Her smile looked different now, not confident but calculating, or maybe I was just projecting. I thought about the 8 years I'd spent protecting my investment in Brandon's company. The millions of dollars I'd quietly funneled into his dream without him knowing. The empire I'd built that he thought was his. And I thought about how men like Brandon never just walked away. How they always needed to make it dramatic, make it public, make it about how they'd outgrown their boring wives who didn't understand their vision. If this was going to end and the data suggested it was, then I would control the narrative. I would choose the time, the place, the witnesses. I would make sure that when Brandon Reed walked away from me, the whole world would see exactly what kind of man he really was. And exactly what he was walking away from. I pulled out my phone and called Daniel Morrison. It was almost 11 at night, but I knew he'd answer. He always did. "Natalie?" he said, voice alert despite the hour. "It's 11 p.m. This must be important." "It is," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need your help with something. Something a little unconventional." There was a pause. Then, how unconventional are we talking? Legal but uncomfortable. I need to set a trap, and I need you to be ready to spring it when I give the signal. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking through the implications. "When and where?" "The Tech Innovation Gala, November 15th. You'll know when the moment comes." "Natalie," he said carefully. "Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." I looked at the receipt still sitting on my desk. $340. Wednesday night. Client dinner. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. But the trap wouldn't work without one crucial piece. One person who could either make this plan brilliant or completely destroy it before it even started. I needed to call Vanessa Sterling, and I needed her to say yes. The following week, I sat across from Vanessa Sterling at a coffee shop in downtown Crossing. The place was tucked into a quiet corner far enough from the street that no one would overhear us. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the pedestrians outside into watercolor smudges. Vanessa had arrived early, her fingers knotted around a porcelain cup, steam rising between us like a veil. She looked up when I settled into the chair. Her expression was careful, controlled, but I caught the flicker of anxiety beneath it. "You said this was about work," she asked, her voice tight. I took my time. Let the silence stretch. Then I leaned forward just enough that she had to meet my eyes. "I know my husband has feelings for you." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Vanessa's face went pale. She set down her cup too quickly, coffee sloshing over the rim. "Nothing has happened," she started, her voice rising. I held up one hand, calm, steady. "I believe you," I said, "but he's thinking about it." She stared at me, searching my face for anger, for accusation. She wouldn't find either. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, running through every possible response, every angle. By the time I walked into this cafe, I'd already decided how this conversation would end. "I need your help." I continued, my tone soft but unyielding. "I need you to pretend to have an affair with him, flirt with him, let him think you're interested, and I need you to document everything." Vanessa recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "Are you out of your mind?" she whispered. "Why would I risk my career for this?" I reached into my bag and slid a folded document across the table. She didn't touch it. $500,000, I said. Cash. And a letter of recommendation for a vice president position at Morrison Holdings in Manhattan. You pick the department. Marketing, business development, operations, whatever you want. Her eyes dropped to the paper. I watched her calculate the gears turning behind her stunned expression. $500,000, a VP role in New York. Escape from Boston, from Brandon, from everything. But she still hesitated. So I played the card I'd been holding. "Last month," I said quietly, "Brandon cornered you in the back storage room after the year-end party. He put his hand on your waist. You filed a complaint with HR. It was buried because he's the CEO. Vanessa's breath caught. Her eyes went sharp cold. "How do you know that?" I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the revelation settle between us. "I own 68% of the company through shell entities," I said. "I see every HR report. Brandon has harassed 3 other women. All of them were silenced with my money. Severance packages, non-disclosure agreements, hush payments funded by the capital I gave him 8 years ago." Vanessa's hands clenched into fists on the table. Her voice was low, shaking with fury. "He used your money to cover up assaults on women." "Yes," I said simply. "And it has to stop before he hurts someone else. This isn't just about revenge, Vanessa. It's about making sure he never touches another woman again." I watched her absorb that, watched the anger harden into something colder, something sharper. $500,000, I repeated. A VP position at Morrison Holdings in Manhattan, and the guarantee that Brandon Reed will never harass another employee. Ever. She was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. What do you need me to do? I pulled out my phone and opened a notes app, turning the screen toward her. Text messages, emails, screenshot everything. Massachusetts is a two-party consent state for audio recording. Do not record any private conversations without his explicit permission. If you do, the evidence will be inadmissible and you could face criminal charges. Vanessa nodded, absorbing every word. I reached into my bag again and placed a small nondescript object on the table. It looked like a pen, but the lens was barely visible near the clip. This is legal in public spaces and in offices where surveillance is disclosed, I explained. Tomorrow I'm updating the employee handbook. There will be a new clause about security cameras in common areas. Once that's filed, you can use this in any shared workspace, conference rooms, hallways, the break room. What about private conversations? She asked. Text only, or record your own contemporaneous notes immediately after any interaction. Courts accept those as evidence. Write down what he said, what you said, where you were, and the time. Do it within an hour, every single time. She picked up the pen, turning it over in her hands. And if he wants to meet somewhere private? Common areas only, I said firmly. If he tries to isolate you, suggest the conference room. If he insists on somewhere without cameras, decline. Say you're uncomfortable. If he pushes, that's harassment, document it immediately. Vanessa set the pen down carefully, her expression unreadable. How far does this go? She asked quietly. I met her gaze, unflinching. As far as the law allows. Massachusetts employment law is strict. We will follow it to the letter. Every screenshot, every email, every documented interaction will be admissible in court. By the time we're done, there will be no question about what kind of man Brandon Reed really is. She exhaled slowly, then she extended her hand across the table. I shook it. Her grip was firm, steady. The fear in her eyes had burned away, leaving only resolve. I'll do it, she said. I allowed myself a small smile. Good. One more thing, start Monday. Walk into Reed Tech like nothing has changed. Be friendly, be warm. Let him think he has a chance. And Vanessa. She looked up. Don't overplay it. Subtle is better. Let him chase you. Men like Brandon always do. She nodded, standing. For a moment she hesitated, then looked down at me. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me about the storage room. I always believed you, I replied. That's why you're here. Vanessa left with the pen in her pocket and the contract in her bag. She walked out of that cafe as my ally, and on Monday morning she would step into Reed Tech and begin the performance of a lifetime. Over the next 5 months, Vanessa played her role flawlessly. I watched from a distance, piecing together updates through encrypted cloud files and carefully worded text messages. Every screenshot, every time-stamped note, every silent video clip landed in a secure folder only I could access. Vanessa followed my instructions to the letter. No audio recordings, no private spaces. Every interaction documented, every touch cataloged, every word preserved. It started subtly. Week 1, late May. Vanessa changed nothing about her appearance, her routine, or her work, but she smiled more when Brandon passed her desk. She held his gaze a fraction longer than necessary during team meetings. She laughed at his jokes, not too loud, not too eager. Just enough. Brandon noticed. I saw it in the way he started lingering near her workstation. The way he asked her opinion on projects that had nothing to do with her department. The way his eyes followed her when she left the room. Week 2, early June. The coffee runs began. Brandon would suggest grabbing a latte before the morning stand-up. Vanessa would agree, casual and easy. They'd return 15 minutes later, cups in hand, talking about quarterly projections or client pitches. She sent me screenshots of his Slack messages. Morning coffee, my treat. You made that client call look effortless yesterday. I don't know how we managed before you joined the team. Each message was innocuous on its own. Together, they painted a picture. Week 4, mid-June. Brandon invited her to a working dinner. Client strategy, he said. Just the two of them. Vanessa agreed and chose a restaurant with outdoor seating cameras on every corner, pedestrians everywhere. She wore a blazer and took notes on her tablet throughout the meal. Afterward, she forwarded me the email invitation, a photograph of the restaurant receipt, and a time-stamped journal entry detailing every comment Brandon made about his marriage. My wife doesn't ask about my work anymore. We've grown apart over the years. She doesn't understand the pressure I'm under. Classic lines. I'd heard variations of them 1,000 times in divorce depositions. But coming from Brandon, they felt like confessions I'd been waiting 8 years to hear. Week 6, early July. Brandon started touching her. Nothing overt. A hand on her shoulder during a presentation. Fingers brushing hers when he handed her documents. His palm resting briefly on the small of her back as they walked into a conference room. Vanessa documented it all. Elevator footage showed his hand on her waist as they rode up to the executive floor. Break room video captured him standing too close, leaning in when he spoke. She logged each incident within an hour, noting the time, location, witnesses present, and his exact words. Massachusetts employment law was strict about hostile work environments. Every touch, every comment, every invasion of personal space built a case that would be impossible to dismiss. Week 8, late July. Brandon finally said it out loud. They were alone in a conference room. Glass walls, security camera in the corner, a sign on the door clearly stating the space was monitored. Vanessa had made sure of it. I haven't felt this way in years, he told her, his voice low. My wife doesn't understand me. Vanessa looked up from her laptop, her expression carefully neutral. I understand you, she said softly. She sent me the video that night. No audio, but I didn't need it. I could read his lips. I could see the way his hand reached across the table, the way she let him hold her fingers for 3 seconds before gently pulling away. It was perfect. August and September. The intimacy escalated. More dinners. Longer coffee breaks. Brandon started texting her late-at-night messages that blurred the line between professional and personal. Vanessa responded just enough to keep him interested, never quite crossing into territory that could compromise her position. She kept every screenshot, every email, every text message time-stamped and backed up to 3 separate cloud accounts. I watched the evidence pile up like kindling around a pyre waiting for the match. Mid-October. Brandon asked her to make it official. They were walking through the company parking garage after a late meeting. Brandon stopped beside his Porsche keys dangling from one hand. I want people to know, he said. I'm tired of hiding. Vanessa tilted her head, feigning surprise. Know what? Us, Brandon said. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. I'm going to file for divorce. I want to be with you, publicly. Vanessa's face remained calm, but I knew what she was thinking. The same thing I was. He'd taken the bait. Late October. Brandon called her on a Thursday evening. I listened to Vanessa recount the conversation word for word. An hour later, her voice steady over the phone. He wants me to go to the gala with him, she said. November 15th, Tech Innovation Gala. He said it's time everyone knows. I closed my eyes, let the satisfaction settle in my chest. What did you say? I said I'd think about it, Vanessa replied. He's calling me tomorrow for an answer. Tell him yes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure? Absolutely, I said. This is exactly what we need. The final message. 2 days later, Vanessa sent me a text. He's hooked. Wants to go public at the gala. Plans to announce the divorce that night. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed my response. Perfect. Proceed. 2 weeks. 14 days until the Tech Innovation Gala. 14 days to position every piece on the board to ensure that when Brandon Reed walked onto that stage, he would walk straight into the trap I'd spent 5 months building. I opened my laptop and pulled up a list of names. Daniel Morrison at the top. Attorney Rebecca Fontaine second. Private investigator Samuel Reynolds third. The board members who owed their seats to my shell companies. The journalists I'd quietly cultivated relationships with over the years. The HR director who would receive a formal complaint the morning of November 14th. Every piece had a place, every move had a purpose. Brandon thought he was about to claim his freedom. Instead, he was about to lose everything. I saved the document and closed the laptop. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window watching the lights of Boston flicker in the distance. 2 weeks. Let the final act begin. The first 2 weeks of November, I worked like a woman possessed. Every meeting, every phone call, every document signed brought me one step closer to the moment I'd been building toward for 5 months. I barely slept. I ate when I remembered to. I moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding Brandon when he was home, which wasn't often, and spending my nights in the guest bedroom with my laptop and a growing stack of legal files. On the first day of the month, I sat across from Rebecca Fontaine in her corner office overlooking the Charles River. She slid the prenuptial agreement across the mahogany desk, each clause highlighted in yellow. "This protects you," she said, tapping one finger on the pages. "Any assets you brought into the marriage remain separate property. That includes your initial seven-figure investment in Reed Tech, all appreciation on those assets, and any equity derived from your capital." I nodded. I'd read the prenup a dozen times since May, but hearing Rebecca confirm it aloud steadied my nerves. "He has no claim to your personal accounts, your inheritance, or the shell companies. Legally, you're bulletproof." I exhaled slowly. "Good. Then let's move to the next phase." The following morning, my financial attorney Martin Caldwell called at 9. His voice was cautious, measured. "You co-signed on Brandon's personal loans through Apex Capital. If we call those loans due and he defaults, you're liable." I had anticipated this. "I know. I have $4.1 million sitting in an escrow account. When he defaults, I'll pay it. Then I'll seize the collateral." Martin was quiet for a moment. "The penthouse is worth $2.8 million. The Porsche lease buyout is $180,000. The yacht is $450,000. Total recovery approximately $3.8 million. You'll take a net loss of $300,000. I didn't hesitate. "Worth it." He cleared his throat. "Understood. I'll draft the paperwork." That same week, I spent an entire day in my home office assembling every document that proved my ownership of Reed Tech. Stock certificates issued to shell companies, transfer agreements, board resolutions, 8 years of capital contributions, equity purchases, and strategic buybacks, all meticulously documented, all legally airtight. By evening, I had 3 binders organized by date and entity. Everything Brandon thought he owned, everything he'd built his reputation on, traced back to money I'd given him. 2 days later, Apex Capital filed formal notice to call Brandon's loans due. He had 30 days to repay $3.7 million plus accrued interest. I knew he didn't have it. His salary was tied up in lifestyle expenses. His stock options were illiquid. His personal accounts had been drained by dinner's gifts and the engagement ring I suspected he'd bought for Vanessa. The clock was ticking. The next day, Apex Capital wired $250,000 to the Tech Innovation Gala Organizing Committee, securing the Platinum sponsor tier. The donation came with perks, reserved seating, logo placement, and most importantly, stage access for Daniel Morrison during the evening program. I reviewed the sponsorship agreement twice. The event coordinator knew Daniel by name. Security would recognize him. No one would stop him when he walked onto that stage. A day later, I met Daniel at the Apex Capital offices in the financial district. He poured us both coffee and sat across from me, his expression skeptical. "Why the theatrics?" he asked bluntly. "We could handle this quietly. File the divorce, execute the board coup, take the company. No one needs to know." I set down my cup and met his eyes. "Because Brandon is going to humiliate me in front of 300 people. He's going to announce our divorce at the gala. He's going to introduce Vanessa as his partner. He's going to erase 8 years of my life in front of everyone who matters in this industry." Daniel's jaw tightened. "So those same 300 people need to see the truth," I continued. "They need to know who built Reed Tech. They need to see what happens when a man uses his power to harass women and discard his wife." I leaned forward. "The women he harassed need to see that powerful men pay consequences. That's worth more than a quiet settlement." Daniel studied me for a long moment. Then he shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "8 years ago, I thought you were naive. I was wrong." I shook my head. "You weren't wrong. I was naive. I believed in him. I thought we were building something together. But he's not the man I married anymore. Maybe he never was." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're playing a real game of chess here, Natalie." I felt the weight of his words settle over me. At first, I wasn't playing chess. I loved him. But he made the rules. Now I'm just finishing the game. 3 days before this gala, Thomas Wright Reed Tech's CFO called me from his personal cell. "I've scheduled an emergency board meeting for the 16th, he said quietly, the day after the gala. Official agenda is quarterly financials, but we both know what it's really about." I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Thomas." He paused. "For what it's worth, most of the board already knows who really runs this company. They're just waiting for you to make it official." 2 days before the event, I bought a black dress. Tailored, elegant, powerful. The kind of dress you wear when you're about to take control of a room. The saleswoman asked if it was for a special occasion. "Very special," I said, running my fingers over the fabric. The night before the gala, Brandon came home at 1 in the morning. I was awake, sitting in the dark living room, watching the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He reeked of Vanessa's perfume jasmine and vanilla, the same scent that clung to his shirts every Wednesday and Friday for the past 5 months. He didn't see me. He walked straight to the bedroom, humming under his breath. For a moment, I felt the last thread of doubt snap. This was real. He was really going to do it. And so was I. I pulled out my phone and sent Daniel a message. "Tomorrow, everything is ready." His reply came instantly. "See you at 8. The morning of the gala arrived cold and clear. I woke early, showered and dressed in the black dress. I pinned my hair back, applied minimal makeup, and fastened my grandmother's diamond earrings, the ones she'd left me along with the $4.2 million that built Brandon's empire. At 6:30, I drove to the Four Seasons. Brandon had left an hour earlier, with her. I parked, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the cold November air. The ballroom entrance glowed with soft light music drifting through the doors. I walked inside alone. 300 people filled the room: investors, executives, journalists, board members. Everyone who mattered. Everyone who thought they knew Brandon and Natalie Reed. Tonight, they would learn the truth. I was done being the silent wife of Brandon Reed. Let the reckoning begin. The Four Seasons ballroom that evening was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting warm light across 300 guests dressed in tailored suits and evening gowns. Boston's tech elite mingled beneath towering floral arrangements, champagne flutes in hand, their laughter echoing off marble columns. It was the kind of event where deals were struck in whispered conversations and reputations were built or destroyed in a single evening. I stood near the entrance, taking it all in. My black dress felt like armor. My grandmother's diamond earrings caught the light as I turned my head, scanning the room. I'd spent $250,000 to ensure Apex Capital was the platinum sponsor of this gala. That money had bought more than logo placement and reserved seating. It had bought Daniel Morrison unfettered access to the stage, his name and photograph preloaded into the security team's VIP roster. No one would question him when the moment came. I spotted the sponsor banner hanging behind the main stage, bold white letters, against a navy backdrop: Platinum Sponsor Apex Capital Fund. A quiet thrill ran through me. Everything was in place. I walked deeper into the ballroom, my heels clicking softly against polished marble. And then I saw them. Brandon stood near the bar, his arm draped casually around Vanessa Sterling's waist. She wore a red dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair swept over one shoulder. They were laughing, heads tilted close together, oblivious to the crowd around them. Or perhaps they wanted to be seen. Perhaps that was the point. I forced myself to keep walking. No one greeted me. No one met my eyes. A few guests glanced my way, then quickly looked elsewhere, their discomfort palpable. I understood. They'd come expecting to see Boston's power couple. Instead, they'd walked into something messier, something none of them wanted to acknowledge. I found my seat, or rather, the lack of one. There was no place card with my name at the VIP tables near the stage. No reserved spot beside my husband. Instead, I was directed to a small table in the far corner, tucked near the kitchen doors, where the waitstaff bustled in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres. The table seated 8, but only 4 chairs were occupied. I recognized no one. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and watched. Brandon and Vanessa had moved to the center of the room where a cluster of investors and executives surrounded them. Brandon's hand never left her back. He leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and she laughed, touching his chest lightly. The intimacy was deliberate, performative. He wanted everyone to see. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. Another guest glanced at me, then quickly looked away. The murmurs started quietly, but I could feel them spreading like ripples across water. Where's his wife? Is that woman with him his? God, how humiliating. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, keeping my expression neutral. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. In less than an hour, they'd have answers they weren't expecting. Brandon approached the head table, Vanessa still at his side. He greeted the event organizers, shook hands with board members, introduced Vanessa with an easy smile. "This is Vanessa Sterling," he said to a prominent venture capitalist. "My right hand. I don't know what I'd do without her." The VC's wife caught my eye from across the room. She looked stricken, as if she'd just witnessed something indecent. She excused herself from her group and made her way over to my corner table. "Natalie," she said softly, touching my shoulder. "Are you all right, dear?" I looked up at her and smiled, calm, composed, unshaken. "I'm just enjoying the evening," I said lightly. "It's a beautiful event, isn't it?" She hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Then she squeezed my shoulder gently and walked away, her expression troubled. The first course arrived. Across the room, Brandon and Vanessa sat side by side at the head table, their chairs angled toward each other. He fed her a bite of something from his plate. She laughed, wiping the corner of his mouth with her napkin. The gesture was intimate, tender, the kind of thing married couples do. I watched the other guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. A few leaned toward their companions, murmuring under their breath. Others stared openly, unable to look away. The discomfort in the room was thick enough to cut. I glanced toward the back of the ballroom and found Daniel Morrison standing near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand. He met my gaze across the crowded room. I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He nodded back. "Ready." The dinner courses passed slowly. Brandon and Vanessa continued their display, oblivious or indifferent to the growing tension around them. By the time dessert was served, the whispers had become harder to ignore. People stopped pretending not to stare. A few guests excused themselves early, clearly eager to escape the spectacle. At 8:45, the MC stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. The lights dimmed slightly, and the conversations around the room fell to a hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice carrying over the sound system, "it is my great honor to present this year's Rising Star CEO Under 40 Award. This recognition goes to an individual who has demonstrated exceptional leadership, innovation, and vision in the tech industry." A spotlight swept across the room, landing on Brandon's table. "Please join me in congratulating this year's recipient, Brandon Reed, founder and CEO of Reed Tech." The room erupted in polite applause. Brandon stood straightening his jacket. Vanessa beamed up at him, her hand lingering on his arm. He bent down, said something in her ear that made her smile, then took her hand and pulled her to her feet. They walked toward the stage together. Brandon passed within feet of my table. His eyes never flickered in my direction. Not once. It was as if I didn't exist, as if 8 years of marriage, 8 years of partnership, 8 years of building his company from nothing, none of it mattered. I was invisible. I watched him climb the steps to the stage, Vanessa's hand still in his. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. There was no surge of anger, no wave of grief, only a cold, crystalline clarity. In 5 minutes, 300 people would see who Brandon Reed really was, and they would never forget it. Brandon took the microphone and the entire room fell silent. He stood at the center of the stage, bathed in warm spotlight, the gleaming award statue resting on the podium beside him. Vanessa remained a few steps behind, her hands clasped in front of her, radiant in her red dress. The two of them looked like they belonged there, powerful, untouchable, inevitable. Brandon's voice filled the ballroom, smooth and confident. "Thank you all for this incredible honor." He began, his tone warm, humble. "When I started Reed Tech 8 years ago, I had nothing but a vision and a laptop in a coffee shop. Tonight, standing here in front of so many brilliant minds, I'm reminded that innovation doesn't happen in isolation. It takes courage, determination, and a willingness to take risks when everyone else says you're crazy. The audience murmured in approval. A few people clapped. Brandon smiled, soaking in the applause. He was in his element, charming, articulate, the perfect picture of a self-made CEO. But I knew better. I sat in my corner table, hands folded in my lap, watching him spin the story we'd built together into a myth of his own making. Success can be lonely at the top. Brandon continued, his expression turning thoughtful. But it doesn't have to be. Over the past year, I've come to realize something important. Life is too short to live in compromise, too short to pretend, too short to avoid the hard decisions we all know we need to make. I felt my pulse quicken. This was it. He was building toward the moment he'd rehearsed, the moment his PR team had scripted down to the last word. I could see it in the way he paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to draw every eye in the room. His strategy was calculated: announce the divorce publicly before I could leak it, control the narrative by positioning himself as the honest CEO, choosing authenticity over pretense, frame Vanessa as the ambitious partner who understands his vision. The kind of power couple narrative that tech media loves. Crisis management had already been briefed. The press release was drafted, waiting in someone's inbox. Investor calls were scheduled for tomorrow morning to reassure stakeholders. Every detail had been planned, except for mine. I've been living a lie, Brandon said quietly, his voice dropping just enough to force the audience to lean in. My marriage has been dead for years. I stayed because I thought it was the right thing to do, because I didn't want to hurt anyone, because I told myself that maybe someday things would get better. He shook his head slowly, as if the weight of his confession pained him. But standing here tonight accepting this award, I realized something. I owe myself honesty. I owe the people who believe in me honesty. And I owe the woman who's helped me see clearly for the first time in years the courage to tell the truth. He turned and extended his hand toward Vanessa. She stepped forward, her expression carefully composed, surprised, hesitant, as if she hadn't rehearsed this moment a dozen times. Brandon pulled her to his side, his arm settling around her waist. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, "I want to publicly announce that I am filing for divorce from my wife, Natalie Winters, who is seated over there." He gestured toward my corner table. The stage lights swung sharply, cutting through the dim ballroom and landing squarely on me. I was blinded for a moment, the glare hot and unforgiving. Every person in that ballroom turned to stare. The silence was deafening. I stood slowly, as if the weight of the moment was too much to bear. My hand trembled as I gripped the edge of the table. I let my breathing hitch just slightly, enough for the people nearest me to notice, enough to look fragile. Brandon's voice carried across the room, relentless. For 8 years, Natalie has been content to stay in the background. She never understood my vision. She was happy being a nameless accountant, counting numbers, playing it safe. She never wanted more. She never wanted to build something extraordinary. A few people in the audience laughed, sharp, ugly sounds, the kind of laughter that comes from people who enjoy watching someone else's humiliation. I caught sight of a venture capitalist I recognized smirking behind his champagne glass. A tech journalist leaned toward her colleague, whispering something that made them both grin. Brandon pressed on, his tone turning colder. "But Vanessa understands what it means to build an empire. She understands ambition. She understands me in ways my wife never could, and I refuse to live another year pretending otherwise." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded stack of papers. Even from across the room, I recognized them. Divorce papers. He held them up for the audience to see, as if they were evidence in a trial. "I'm having these delivered to you right now, Natalie," Brandon said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You need to leave this event. You don't belong here anymore." He gestured toward the back of the room. 2 security guards in dark suits began moving toward my table, their expressions neutral, professional. They had their orders. The room watched in stunned silence. Some people looked horrified. Others looked fascinated, as if they were watching a reality show unfold in real time. A few leaned back in their seats, arms crossed, clearly entertained. I stayed standing, shoulders slumped, head bowed slightly. I let a single tear slip down my cheek, not real but convincing enough. My breathing was shallow, uneven. I looked broken, defeated. exactly the way Brandon wanted me to look. He thought he'd won. He thought I would slink away quietly humiliated and powerless. He'd spent months building this narrative, Brandon Reed, the visionary CEO, trapped in a loveless marriage with a boring, unambitious wife who couldn't keep up. He'd orchestrated this moment down to the lighting cue, confident that I would play my part, the discarded wife too weak to fight back. On stage, Vanessa touched Brandon's arm gently, her expression pained, conflicted. She was playing her role perfectly, the other woman who never meant for any of this to happen, who simply fell for a man trapped in an unhappy marriage. She looked down, biting her lip as if she wished this could have been handled differently. But I saw the faint tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled just slightly against Brandon's sleeve. She was ready. The security guards were 5 steps away, 4-3. I stood there trembling under the spotlight, tears glistening on my face, looking like a woman whose entire world had just shattered in front of 300 witnesses. Brandon turned back to the microphone, preparing to deliver his final line, the gracious closing statement his PR team had crafted to make him look magnanimous even in cruelty. But before he could speak, a voice cut through the silence like a knife, deep, calm, authoritative, and laced with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Reed, I think this performance should end right here." Every head in the ballroom turned toward the source of the voice. Daniel Morrison stepped out of the shadows near the bar, his tailored suit catching the light as he moved with deliberate, measured steps toward the stage. His expression was cold, his eyes locked on Brandon with an intensity that made the air in the room shift. The security guards froze mid-step, uncertain. Brandon's smile faltered, and I let the smallest flicker of a smile touch the corner of my lips, just for a heartbeat, before I wiped it away and let another tear fall. Let the reckoning begin. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the voice. Daniel Morrison moved through the crowd with the kind of authority that required no introduction. People stepped aside instinctively, parting like the Red Sea as he walked past tables draped in white linen and guests frozen mid-conversation. His Tom Ford suit fit perfectly sharp lines and understated elegance. A Patek Philippe watch glinted at his wrist. Everything about him radiated power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself because everyone in the room already knew. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. "That's Daniel Morrison, Apex Capital. What's he doing here?" I stood at my corner table, hands still trembling from my performance, watching Daniel cut through the crowd with precision. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from anticipation. This was the moment we'd planned. The moment Brandon had no idea was coming. Daniel, as the representative of the platinum sponsor, had every right to be on that stage. The event organizers knew his name. Security had his photograph in their VIP roster. No one could stop him. No one would dare. 2 security guards moved toward Daniel, hands raised as if to intercept him. One of them hesitated, leaning toward the other. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the recognition flash across their faces. The first guard whispered something urgent. "That's Daniel Morrison, platinum sponsor." The second guard stepped back immediately, hands dropping to his sides. They both retreated, clearing a path. Daniel climbed the stage steps without breaking stride. No one tried to stop him. Brandon stood at the center of the stage, still holding the microphone, his expression shifting from confusion to irritation. Vanessa remained a few steps behind her, smile faltering as she watched Daniel approach. Daniel reached Brandon and without a word took the microphone from his hand. Not aggressively, just calmly, as if it had always belonged to him. "What the hell?" Brandon sputtered, reaching for the mic. "This is my moment." Daniel ignored him entirely. He turned to face the audience, his voice calm, clear, and impossibly controlled. "My name is Daniel Morrison, managing partner of Apex Capital." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Apex Capital managed $2.3 billion in assets. Everyone in Boston's tech and venture capital circles knew the name. Daniel Morrison wasn't just anyone. He was one of the most powerful investors in the city. "I apologize for interrupting what has been a rather distasteful performance." Daniel continued, his tone cold and measured. "But I think it's time someone told the truth." He glanced toward the back of the room where I knew the event's videographer was stationed. "Keep rolling," he said loud enough for the camera operator to hear. The young man behind the camera nodded, adjusting his lens. Brandon stepped forward, his face flushing red. "This is my event, my award. You have no right. Daniel turned to him, his expression glacial. Your event, he repeated each word deliberate. Mr. Reed, you don't even own the company you're CEO of. The room went still. Brandon's mouth opened, then closed, his jaw clenched, muscles twitching beneath his skin. His eyes darted toward Vanessa, then back to Daniel, wild searching, desperate for an explanation that wasn't coming. What are you talking about? Brandon demanded, his voice rising. I founded Reed Tech. I built it from nothing. It's mine. Daniel didn't flinch. No, Mr. Reed, he said quietly. It's not. He turned away from Brandon and scanned the audience, his gaze sweeping across the sea of stunned faces before him. Then his eyes found mine. Mrs. Winters, Daniel said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Would you like to take it from here? Every eye in the room turned toward me. I stood at my corner table, tears still wet on my cheeks, shoulders slumped, looking every bit the broken wife Brandon had just publicly humiliated. For a long moment, I didn't move. I let the silence stretch, let the anticipation build. Then I reached up and wiped the tears from my face, slowly, deliberately, and straightened my spine. The trembling stopped. The fragility vanished. My expression shifted, no longer grief-stricken or defeated. Cold, focused, controlled. I looked directly at Brandon, and I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't forgiving. It was the smile of someone who had just watched their carefully laid trap snap shut. The ballroom remained utterly silent as I stepped away from my table. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing in the cavernous space. No one spoke. No one moved. They all watched as I walked toward the stage, not slumped, not broken, but with the steady confidence of someone who had always belonged there. Brandon stared at me, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Vanessa's eyes were wide, her expression unreadable. Daniel stepped aside, making room for me at the center of the stage. I climbed the steps, 1, 2, 3, each footfall deliberate, measured. With every step I shed the mask I'd been wearing for 5 months. The silent wife. The overlooked partner. The woman who was supposed to disappear quietly into the background while her husband claimed glory that was never his. By the time I reached the top of the stage, I was no longer that woman. I took the microphone from Daniel's outstretched hand. Our eyes met briefly, and he gave me the faintest nod. Ready. I turned to face the audience. Hundreds of faces stared back, frozen in anticipation. I let the silence hold for one more heartbeat. Then I spoke. Good evening, I said, my voice steady, clear, and utterly calm. My name is Natalie Winters, and it's time you all learned the truth about Reed Tech. I glanced at Brandon. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. I smiled again, sharp, cold, victorious. Vanessa, who had been frozen at the edge of the stage, suddenly moved. She took a sharp step away from Brandon, her hand jerking out of his grip as if his touch burned her. Brandon reached for her, instinctively, confusion flooding his face. Vanessa, what are you? She didn't answer him. Instead, she turned toward me, her expression shifting from shock to something colder: professionalism, detachment. The mask of the ambitious mistress cracked, revealing something else underneath. Vanessa walked past Brandon without a word, her red dress catching the stage lights as she moved. When she reached the center of the stage, she stopped directly in front of me. For a moment, our eyes met. Then Vanessa bowed, a full, formal bow, her head dipping low, her hands clasped in front of her. It wasn't the kind of bow you give a stranger. It was the bow of someone acknowledging authority, respect, deference. Mrs. Winters, she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the stunned silence of the ballroom. She straightened, met my eyes one last time with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret. Relief. Something in between, and then turned on her heel and walked off the stage. The click of her heels echoed across the marble floor as she descended the steps, moved through the crowd, and disappeared through the side exit. No one stopped her. No one said a word. Brandon stood frozen, his mouth open, staring at the empty space where Vanessa had been seconds before. What the hell just happened? He whispered. I didn't answer. I just smiled. And I owned that stage. 3, 2, 1. Natalie is standing center stage. The spotlight is on her. Brandon is frozen, staring. The entire ballroom is silent. And she's about to say 4 words that will end Brandon Reed's career forever. Before she speaks, comment "I'm ready" if you want to hear it. Just so you know, the next section includes fictionalized elements for dramatic effect. If that's not your vibe, now's the time to exit. Okay, here it comes. I wrapped my fingers around the microphone Daniel handed me and turned to face the man I'd married 8 years ago. Brandon stood frozen several feet away, jaw clenched tight, breathing shallow. Behind him, Vanessa remained motionless, her expression caught between shock and dread. The ballroom held its breath, hundreds of faces suspended in anticipation, waiting to see what would unfold next. I didn't rush. I let the silence build until it became unbearable. Let Brandon sweat under the golden glow above, wondering what bomb I was about to detonate. When the words finally came, they cut through the quiet like a blade through silk, cold, sharp, undeniable. Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Winters, and tonight I'm going to tell you who actually owns Reed Tech Solutions. Brandon lurched forward, hand shooting out as though he could physically stop me. Natalie, what the hell are you? I didn't acknowledge him. My gaze remained fixed on the audience rolling over his protest as if he'd never spoken. 8 years ago, my husband's startup was dying. He walked through our front door one evening and confessed he'd lost everything. The venture capital firm he'd been courting had withdrawn. His co-founder had abandoned ship. He had 6 weeks of operating capital left and no way to cover payroll. A pause. Let the information sink in. A handful of people shifted awkwardly. Others leaned forward, captivated. Behind me, the enormous projection screen blazed to life. Daniel had triggered the presentation we'd prepared. The first image materialized a scanned wire transfer document dated October 2017. $4.2 million. Sender Natalie Winters. Recipient Reed Tech Solutions. Audible gasps rippled through the crowd. So I transferred my entire inheritance to his dying company, I stated, tone matter of fact. Every dollar of the estate my grandmother spent 70 years building. Brandon's mouth fell open, working soundlessly. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him ghost-like. But here's the interesting part. I didn't put my name on the investment, I continued. Instead, I channeled the funds through Apex Capital with Daniel, here serving as my trustee. To everyone else, including Brandon, the investment appeared to come from an anonymous angel investor. My husband never had the slightest idea it was me. Daniel offered a single confirming nod. Head swiveled to look at him, then snapped back to me. Why would I do that? I asked, as though responding to the question forming in everyone's minds. Why conceal my involvement? Why not tell my husband I was funding his company? The question hung suspended unanswered. Because I needed to know if he would treat me differently when he believed I was nobody. Just some nameless accountant who counted numbers and stayed invisible. I locked eyes with Brandon. And as it turned out, he absolutely did. The screen transformed behind me. New slides appeared, comprehensive documents detailing the complete ownership structure of Reed Tech. Shell corporations, limited liability entities, stock certificates issued to holding companies Crescent Ventures, LLC, Harbor Capital Group. Every single one traced back to me. I own 68% of this company, I announced, voice slicing through the stunned silence. Brandon, for the past 8 years, you've been working for me. Brandon staggered backward, gripping the podium's edge. His breathing turned ragged, the kind that comes before a panic attack. He shook his head slowly, resembling a man trying to wake from a nightmare. The screen updated. 2 additional funding rounds appeared, 2019 and 2021, both channeled through separate entities, both financed entirely by my capital. In 2019, I explained, gesturing toward the documents, Reed Tech needed another $1.8 million to scale operations. Brandon announced he'd secured funding from a New York venture capital firm. The truth, my money, funneled through a second shell company I controlled. Next slide. 2021. Another $2.5 million to acquire a competitor. Brandon called it a strategic partnership backed by sophisticated private investors. Once again, my money, my capital, my risk. I faced the audience directly. Venture capitalists, tech executives, journalists, all transfixed. Every time Brandon celebrated closing a funding round, he was spending my money. Every product launch, every expansion, every hire built on capital I provided through entities he never knew I controlled. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the projector's faint hum overhead. I turned back to Brandon. He stared at the screen, face slack, hands trembling. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. I bootstrapped Reed Tech from nothing, I said quietly, each word measured. I rescued it when it was 6 weeks from bankruptcy. I funded every milestone. And I did this while my husband told everyone told you that I was just some boring accountant who couldn't understand his vision. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others studied their plates distressed. I moved closer to Brandon, heels clicking deliberately against polished marble. 10 minutes ago, you stood here and told hundreds of people that I never wanted more, that I was content being nameless, that I couldn't comprehend what it means to build an empire. My voice remained calm, but steel ran beneath every syllable. Brandon, I built your empire. The only problem is you never knew it. Brandon's mouth moved frantically, but no sound emerged. He looked like he was drowning in open air. His eyes darted wildly, screen to Daniel, to audience, to me. Finally, he spun toward Vanessa. Vanessa, he croaked, voice breaking. Tell them. Tell everyone this is insane. Tell them she's lying. Vanessa stood motionless, hands clasped. For an agonizing moment, she didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stared at Brandon. Then she took one deliberate step backward, away from him. The gesture was subtle, but everyone witnessed it. She wasn't standing beside him. She was separating herself from him. Brandon stared at her face, collapsing inward. Vanessa, he whispered. She offered no response. And I watched, composed, detached, triumphant, as the fraudulent world Brandon Reed had built on lies finally began crumbling. The silence was absolute. I turned back to the microphone, preparing to deliver the next blow. This performance was far from finished. Vanessa Sterling pivoted slowly to face Brandon. The softness that had lingered in her expression evaporated instantly, replaced by something glacial and unforgiving. Mr. Reed, she declared, her voice cutting through the silence with surgical precision. I was never your mistress. Brandon's head whipped toward her so violently I thought he might injure himself, his features contorting into a grotesque mask of confusion and mounting terror. What? No, that's not. We were. Last month. Vanessa cut him off, enunciating each syllable with crystalline clarity, so that every single person in the ballroom could absorb her words. Mrs. Winters approached me with an offer. $500,000 in cash, plus a letter of recommendation for a vice president position at any firm of my choosing. The entire room became preternaturally still, as though someone had pressed pause on reality itself. In return, Vanessa elaborated, her tone remaining perfectly level, I agreed to pretend I found you attractive, to engage in flirtation, to allow you to believe I genuinely desired a romantic relationship with you, and most importantly, to meticulously document every single inappropriate action you took or word you spoke. Brandon reeled backward as though she'd physically slapped him across the face. Vanessa reached into her designer clutch and extracted a small USB drive. She elevated it high enough for the entire audience to observe clearly, then placed it with deliberate care on the stage's edge. All the text messages you sent me, she recited, her delivery now clinical and emotionally detached. The emails with inappropriate comments about my appearance, my body, your marriage. The messages where you claimed your wife didn't understand you. The late-night texts asking me to meet you alone. Everything is on this device. She gestured toward the massive screen behind us, where Daniel had already prepared the next presentation sequence. Images materialized, screenshot after screenshot of text conversations, each one time-stamped and date-stamped. Brandon's contact name appeared prominently at the top of every exchange. You looked absolutely stunning today. I found it impossible to concentrate on the investor call because of you. My wife and I have been emotionally distant for years. You've awakened something in me I thought was dead. Meet me in the parking garage once everyone else has left. I desperately need to see you. The messages advanced across the screen with agonizing slowness, each revelation more damaging than its predecessor. Furthermore, all video recordings, Vanessa continued without the slightest tremor in her voice, were captured exclusively in locations where corporate policy explicitly mandates disclosure of active surveillance: elevator cars, conference rooms, common workplace areas. You were fully aware these spaces operated under constant monitoring, Mr. Reed. You personally signed the employee handbook acknowledging these security protocols. She rotated to address the audience directly. Additionally, I maintained a comprehensive journal. 47 pages of contemporaneous documentation written immediately after each interaction with Mr. Reed. Each entry specifies the precise date, exact time, specific location, and exhaustive details of what he said and did. Every instance when he touched my shoulder uninvited, every occasion when he invaded my personal space, every moment when he leaned uncomfortably close and whispered something wildly inappropriate. Brandon's hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles bone white under the stage lights. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple, sweat beaded on his forehead glistening under the harsh stage lighting. All documented incidents. Vanessa articulated, her voice acquiring a harder edge. Have corresponding corroboration from security footage. Every time he placed his hand on my waist, inside the elevator timestamp, authenticated camera perspective verified. Every time he trapped me inside a conference room, captured on video and thoroughly documented. She retrieved the USB drive once more and extended it in my direction. Every piece of evidence is entirely admissible under Massachusetts state law. Zero illegal recordings. Absolutely no violations of two-party consent statutes. Simply documentation, text messages, email correspondence, video footage from properly monitored spaces, and contemporaneous written testimony. Precisely what employment law permits any employee to collect for self-protection against workplace harassment. I accepted the USB drive from her outstretched hand, raising it high enough for the assembled crowd to witness. The diminutive black device somehow felt substantially heavier than its physical mass suggested, laden with accumulated months of evidence, months documenting Brandon's arrogance and systematic cruelty, all compressed into one tiny piece of technology. Vanessa wheeled back toward Brandon, and this time I detected genuine fury emanating from her controlled exterior. Before you even consider claiming I recorded you covertly, she stated, each word sharpened to a razor's edge. Allow me to establish absolute clarity. I did nothing of the sort. Every video segment originated from areas where you possessed full knowledge of active surveillance systems. Every text message and email was voluntarily sent by you using your personal devices. The only thing I recorded was transcribing your exact words, noting where you spoke them, and logging when it occurred. That constitutes evidence, Mr. Reed. It's completely legal, it's courtroom admissible, and it's going to systematically dismantle everything you've built. She advanced another step toward him, her expression radiating cold determination and absolute fearlessness. And understand this, it's deeply personal for me, she added, her voice descending to a lower, more dangerous register. Last year, immediately following the holiday party, you cornered me inside the rear storage facility. You placed your hand on my waist without permission. You invaded my space and whispered that I appeared far too attractive to be wasted on junior-level executives. I submitted a formal complaint to Human Resources the very next morning. Brandon's eyes expanded to an almost comical width. He attempted to formulate a protest, but Vanessa steamrolled over any objection before it could materialize. The complaint was systematically buried, she stated with chilling flatness. Human Resources informed me insufficient evidence existed, that the situation devolved to my testimony against yours, that perhaps I had fundamentally misinterpreted your intentions. 3 weeks following that conversation, I received a settlement proposal, $10,000, accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement. I was explicitly informed that refusing to sign would result in my position being strategically reevaluated. She redirected her attention to scan the audience, her gaze methodically sweeping across every transfixed face. I wasn't his first victim, she revealed quietly, her words somehow carrying tremendous weight despite their soft delivery. 3 other women preceded me. Every single one experienced harassment. Everyone was silenced through settlement payments financed by the very inheritance Mrs. Winters used to save this company from bankruptcy money that was subsequently weaponized to silence the women her husband systematically victimized. A wave of agitated murmuring rippled outward through the ballroom. Multiple women in the audience responded with slow, knowing nods, their expressions reflecting grim recognition, as though Vanessa's experience resonated with painful familiarity. Vanessa descended from the elevated stage and proceeded directly toward the front row of reserved tables. She conspicuously avoided any proximity to Brandon. Instead, she deliberately seated herself among the audience members who had witnessed this entire confrontation consciously, aligning herself with them, definitively not with him. Brandon remained paralyzed at the stage's center, his face locked into a bizarre hybrid of shock and barely suppressed rage. His hands exhibited visible tremors at his sides. His respiration had become shallow and accelerated. For an extended, uncomfortable moment, he simply stared at Vanessa as though his brain couldn't process the magnitude of her betrayal. Then something inside him snapped and he lunged forward. "You goddamn!" He managed 2 aggressive steps in her direction, fists clenched into tight balls, facial features warped by uncontrolled fury. Daniel Morrison reacted with impressive speed. He interposed himself between Brandon and the stage's edge, one hand raised in a stopping gesture, his expression radiating absolute zero temperature. "Don't," Daniel commanded with quiet authority. 2 security personnel materialized from the stage wings, advancing rapidly to establish flanking positions on either side of Brandon. They maintained a non-contact posture for now, but their physical presence communicated unmistakable intent. One additional step from Brandon would trigger immediate intervention. Brandon whirled toward me instead, his complexion now flushed crimson, his eyes practically radiating concentrated hatred. "Fine!" He snarled, his voice vibrating with barely restrained volcanic rage. "She trapped me! You both trapped me! But you cannot take my company. I built it from nothing. I expanded it. I transformed it into what it represents today. Using my money." I interjected, my voice maintaining perfect calm and steadiness, slicing cleanly through his fury like a precision instrument. Brandon's mouth slammed shut with an audible click. I stepped forward, deliberately eliminating the remaining distance between us until I stood positioned directly before him, close enough that only he could observe the subtle smile playing across my features. "Let's have a conversation about your outstanding debts, Brandon," I suggested softly, almost intimately. Every trace of color evacuated his face instantaneously. I turned back toward the microphone, mentally preparing to deliver the subsequent devastating revelation, because our performance still had 3 additional twists remaining. And Brandon Reed possessed absolutely no comprehension of how profoundly deep this trap actually extended. Daniel Morrison stepped forward, holding a tablet in his hand. He glanced at the screen, swiped through a few pages, then looked up at Brandon with an expression that could have frozen steel. "Mr. Reed," Daniel said, his voice calm and clinical, "let's discuss your lifestyle." Brandon's hands balled into fists at his sides, his entire body rigid with tension. He opened his mouth to protest, but Daniel didn't give him the chance. "Your penthouse in Back Bay," Daniel continued, gesturing toward the projection screen behind us. A new image appeared, a loan document with Brandon's signature at the bottom. $2.8 million, loaned to you by Apex Capital in 2022. He swiped to the next page on his tablet. The screen updated. "Notice the co-signer line," Daniel said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Natalie Winters, your wife, guaranteed the loan. If you default, she's liable." A murmur rippled through the audience. A few investors leaned forward, studying the document on the screen. Daniel moved to the next slide. "The Porsche 911 Turbo S you drove here tonight, leased through a limited liability company owned by Mrs. Winters. The monthly payments are automatically deducted from an account she controls." Brandon stared at the screen, his jaw slack, his hands trembling at his sides. "Your yacht currently docked in Nantucket," Daniel continued. $450,000 loan, co-signed by Mrs. Winters. Another slide appeared. This one listed smaller expenses, monthly memberships, travel records, credit card statements. "Your country club membership," Daniel read aloud. $80,000 per year, paid from a joint account funded entirely by your wife's capital. He swiped again. "First-class flights to Monaco, Dubai, Tokyo over the past 3 years, all charged to a credit card where Mrs. Winters is the primary account holder. You're an authorized user. She's the one financially responsible." The screen cycled through each expense, each debt, each signature. Every line item traced back to me, every loan, every lease, every payment, all of it tied to my name, my credit, my capital. Daniel set the tablet down on the edge of the stage and looked directly at Brandon. "Your total personal debt, Mr. Reed, is $3.7 million, and every single dollar is guaranteed by your wife." The room fell silent. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting. Daniel picked up the tablet again and scrolled to a new document. "As of 11:47 tonight," he said, his voice steady and unwavering, Apex Capital has formally issued a recall notice on all outstanding loans in your name. You have 30 days to repay the full amount, $3.7 million, plus 18% annual interest. Brandon's expression collapsed inward, eyes going glassy and unfocused. He swayed on his feet, catching himself against the podium before his knees buckled completely. That's impossible, he stammered. I'll go bankrupt. I'll lose everything. Yes, Daniel said simply, you will. Brandon's head snapped toward me, his eyes wild, desperate. If I can't pay, you have to, he shouted, his voice cracking. You're the co-signer. You're liable. You'll lose everything too. I stepped forward, my heels clicking softly against the stage floor. I looked at Brandon, the man I'd loved for 8 years, the man who'd just humiliated me in front of 300 people, and I smiled. You're absolutely right, I said calmly. I am the co-signer. When you default in 30 days, I will pay every single penny of that debt. Brandon's expression shifted from panic to confusion. But here's what you don't understand. I continued, my voice cold and precise. When a co-signer pays a defaulted loan, they have the legal right to seize all collateral tied to that debt. The penthouse mine, the Porsche mine, the yacht mine. Every asset with my name as guarantor becomes my property the moment I pay your debt. I turned to the audience, letting them absorb the weight of what I just said. I have $4.1 million sitting in an escrow account right now, I said. I've been ready for this moment for months. The day Brandon defaults, I'll transfer the funds, pay off his debts, and take possession of everything he thinks he owns. Daniel stepped forward again, his tablet still in hand. Under Massachusetts law, he explained, when a co-signer satisfies a defaulted loan, they assume full ownership of any collateral used to secure that debt. It's a standard provision in every loan agreement Mr. Reed signed. He glanced at Brandon. You didn't read the fine print, did you? Brandon's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a man drowning, gasping for air that wouldn't come. I walked closer to him, close enough that only he could hear the edge in my voice. In 30 days, Brandon, you'll be homeless. No penthouse, no car, no yacht, no country club, nothing. You'll have exactly what you had 8 years ago when you came to me begging for money. Nothing. The screen behind us changed one final time. A simple chart appeared, breaking down the financial outcome in stark, undeniable numbers. Default payment plan. Brandon defaults, $3.7 million owed. Natalie pays $4.1 million from escrow. Natalie seizes collateral $3.8 million, penthouse car yacht assets. Natalie's net loss, $300,000. Brandon's net loss. Everything. I turned back to the audience. I'm willing to lose $300,000, I said clearly, to make sure Brandon Reed never benefits from another dollar of my money. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Brandon looked down at the tables in front of him, searching desperately for an ally. For someone, anyone, who would stand up and defend him. Tell these people I was lying. Tell them this was a mistake. But no one moved. The tech CEOs and venture capitalists sitting in the front rows looked away, some shaking their heads slowly. They understood the numbers. They'd seen the documents. They knew what Brandon was, a man who'd built his entire life on his wife's money while treating her like she didn't exist. A few of them exchanged glances. One investor leaned over to his colleague and whispered something that made the other man nod grimly. Brandon Reed was finished. Everyone in that room knew it. He turned back to me, his face twisted in desperation and rage. You can't do this, he said, his voice hoarse. You can't just take everything. I built that life. I earned it. With my money, I said, cutting him off. You built nothing, Brandon. You spent, and now the bill is due. Brandon's legs buckled. He grabbed the edge of the podium to steady himself, his knuckles white, his breathing ragged. For a moment, I thought he might collapse entirely. Then from the audience, a figure stood. A man rose from one of the VIP tables near the front, tall, composed, wearing a charcoal suit and silver-rimmed glasses. Thomas Wright, Chief Financial Officer of Reed Tech Solutions. He adjusted his tie, stepped away from his table, and began walking toward the stage. Every eye in the room turned to watch him. Brandon looked up, hope flickering across his face for the first time in minutes. Thomas, Brandon croaked. Tell them this is insane. Tell them. But Thomas didn't look at Brandon. He looked at me. And I knew everyone in that room knew that the next blow was about to land. Thomas Wright climbed the stage steps holding a folder in his hand. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who'd spent years balancing budgets and navigating boardroom politics. His silver-rimmed glasses caught the stage lights as he stopped a few feet from Brandon, who was still staring at me with a mixture of desperation and disbelief. Thomas didn't acknowledge Brandon immediately. Instead, he turned to face the audience, opened the folder, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Reed," Thomas said, his voice calm and professional. "I have news from the board of directors." Brandon's head snapped toward him. "What?" Thomas adjusted his glasses and read from the document in his hand. An emergency board meeting was convened this afternoon at 4 p.m. Mrs. Winters, exercising her rights as the holder of 68% of the company's voting shares, called for a vote of no confidence in your leadership as chief executive officer. The ballroom went silent. Thomas looked up from the paper. The vote was 6-1. You have been removed as CEO of Reed Tech Solutions, effective immediately. For the record, the sole dissenting vote came from your college roommate on the board, who abstained from all subsequent votes regarding asset seizure and IP transfer due to obvious conflict of interest. "No!" Brandon shouted, his voice cracking. "I founded this company. I built it from nothing." Thomas didn't flinch. "You founded it, Mr. Reed," he said evenly. "Mrs. Winters funded it. There's a legal distinction." He glanced at me, then back at Brandon. "Mrs. Winters has been appointed board chair. The new CEO will be announced next week." Brandon staggered backward, his face twisting in anguish. He spun toward me, his eyes wild, his hands clenched into fists. "This is insane," he shouted. "We're married. Massachusetts is a community property state. Half of everything is mine." For the first time all evening, I laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh. It wasn't forgiving. It was the kind of laugh that comes when someone finally reveals just how little they've been paying attention. I reached into the leather portfolio Daniel had handed me earlier and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound with a black cover. I held it up for Brandon to see. "Oh, Brandon," I said, still smiling. "You really should have read the prenup." He staggered, gripping the podium's edge to keep from falling. I flipped open the cover and turned to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "This is our prenuptial agreement," I said, clearly loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "The one your lawyer drafted 7 years ago in 2017. The one you insisted I sign before we got married." The screen behind me flickered to life again. Daniel had already cued the next slide. The text appeared in bold, clean lettering. Article 4, Section 2.3. Any property derived from inheritance or premarital assets shall remain separate property in perpetuity, regardless of appreciation in value during the marriage. I looked at Brandon, watching the realization slowly dawn on his face. "You insisted on this clause," I said, my voice calm and cold. "You wanted to protect your startup equity from me, just in case we ever divorced. You made sure that anything you brought into the marriage would stay yours no matter what." I stepped closer to him. "But here's the thing, Brandon. Reed Tech was funded entirely by my inheritance money I received from my grandmother before we got married. According to Massachusetts law and this prenup, the one you demanded, Reed Tech, is my separate property." Brandon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You built the value," I continued. "From 4 million to 75 million, congratulations. But under the prenup, you insisted on any appreciation of separate property remain separate. You don't get a dime." Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence. "Massachusetts General Laws. Chapter 208, Section 34, he said. Appreciation of separate property due to market forces, effort, or labor remains separate property if the original asset was acquired before marriage or through inheritance. The prenup Mr. Reed signed reinforces that statute." He turned to Brandon. "You were an employee, Mr. Reed, a highly paid one, $450,000 a year, but an employee nonetheless. Mrs. Winters owns the equity. She always has." I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at Brandon, who stood frozen, his world collapsing around him. "The house," I said, my tone matter-of-fact, "in my name. The cars registered to LLCs I own. Your salary paid by my company. Even that Armani tuxedo you're wearing right now, I bought it last week." I let that sink in. "And in 30 days, when you default on your loans, I'll pay them off, seize every asset tied to your name, and write off the $300,000 loss as the best investment I ever made." Brandon's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium to steady himself, his breathing ragged, his face streaked with sweat. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. Natalie, please, I'm sorry, I'll change, I'll do anything. He dropped to his knees. The ballroom collectively gasped. 300 people watched as Brandon Reed, the man who'd stood on that stage 20 minutes ago and publicly humiliated his wife, knelt in front of me begging. Please, he said again, his voice hoarse. Don't do this, I'll make it right, I swear. I looked down at him, no pity, no anger, no emotion at all. You're not sorry you did it, Brandon, I said quietly. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I turned away from him back to the microphone and addressed the audience. For 8 years, I funded this man's life. I gave him $4.2 million to save his failing startup. I co-signed loans so he could live like a king. I routed additional capital through shell companies so he could celebrate closing funding rounds and take credit for success he didn't earn. I glanced back at Brandon still on his knees, and tonight he stood on this stage and told 300 people that I was a nobody, that I didn't understand his vision, that I was content being nameless. My voice hardened. But I wasn't nameless, I was invisible, and there's a difference. The room was utterly silent. I turned back to Brandon one last time. In 30 days, you'll have nothing. No company, no title, no penthouse, no car, no yacht, nothing but the debts you can't pay and the reputation you destroyed. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle over him. And I'll have everything. Brandon stayed on his knees, his shoulders shaking, his head bowed. But I wasn't finished. I turned back to the audience, my expression calm, controlled. I know what you're all thinking, I said. Surely that's enough. Surely she's done. I smiled cold, sharp, victorious. But I'm not done yet. There are 2 more gifts I'd like to give my husband tonight. I nodded to Daniel, who pulled up the next slide. Let's talk about intellectual property, shall we? I turned back to the audience, the microphone steady in my hand. Brandon was still on his knees, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and hollow. He looked like a man who'd lost everything, which of course he had. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Brandon! I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Do you remember 3 weeks ago, when you fired 5 senior engineers? His head lifted slowly. His eyes were unfocused, distant, as if he were still trying to process everything that had already happened. You called them dead weight, I continued. You told the executive team they were challenging your authority, that they were slowing the company down. So you let them go, just like that. Brandon blinked, confusion flickering across his face. So what? He mumbled, his voice hoarse. Thomas Wright stepped forward, his silver-rimmed glasses glinting under the stage lights. He held up another document from his folder. Those 5 engineers, Thomas said, his tone calm and professional, were the ones who built your so-called revolutionary AI product. The one you've been promising to investors for the past 6 months. The flagship product you announced would launch next quarter. Brandon's face went blank. Thomas glanced at me, then back at Brandon. Here's the thing, Mr. Reed. Those engineers developed the core algorithms for that product on their own time. Nights, weekends, outside of standard work hours, which means under Massachusetts employment law and the intellectual property clauses in their contracts, they own the IP, not Reed Tech. A murmur rippled through the audience. A few investors leaned forward, suddenly very interested. I smiled. I reached out to them 2 weeks ago, I said. I offered each of them a position at my new company, Winters Technology Consulting, better salary, equity, full creative control over their work. I paused, letting that sink in. They all accepted. The screen behind me changed. A new document appeared, clean, official, signed by all 5 engineers. Intellectual Property Acquisition Agreement. Winters Technology Consulting, LLC, acquires exclusive licensing rights to core AI algorithms developed by engineers' names. Total purchase price, $2 million. They sold me the exclusive rights to those algorithms, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. Every line of code, every model, every patent-pending innovation, all of it belongs to me now. I turned to Brandon, who was staring at the screen, his mouth hanging open. That game-changing product you promised in your speech tonight, I said softly. The one you told investors would triple the company's valuation. The one you were planning to launch next quarter. I let the silence stretch. You can't launch it. I own the underlying technology. Brandon's legs buckled. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the podium, trying to steady himself. Daniel Morrison stepped forward, tablet in hand. Reed Tech's current valuation is $75 million. Daniel said, his tone matter of fact. That valuation was based almost entirely on the anticipated launch of your AI product. Investors committed capital on the promise that this technology would disrupt the market. He swiped to the next page on his tablet. This afternoon, we conducted a revaluation. Without the AI platform, Reed Tech is worth approximately $12 million. It's a viable company, good client base, solid revenue, but nothing revolutionary. Just another mid-tier consulting firm. He looked directly at Brandon. Mrs. Winters owns 68% of $12 million. You, Mr. Reed, own 32% of nothing. The room was silent. 300 people watched as the final piece of Brandon's empire crumbled. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the front rows where the venture capitalists and tech investors sat. Some of them looked furious. Others looked resigned. All of them understood what had just happened. The investors sitting in this room tonight, I said, addressing them directly, put money into Reed Tech because Brandon promised them breakthrough AI technology. He told you this product would change the industry, that it would generate massive returns. I glanced back at Brandon. But he can't deliver. The product doesn't exist anymore, at least not for Reed Tech. I own the technology, and I have no intention of licensing it back to him. One of the venture capitalists in the front row, a man I recognized from a funding round 2 years ago, leaned back in his chair and shook his head slowly. Another investor whispered something to his colleague, both of them looking grim. Brandon staggered to his feet, gripping the podium for support. His face was streaked with sweat, his suit wrinkled and disheveled. He looked like a man who'd been in a fight and lost. "Why?" he croaked, his voice barely audible. "Why would you do this?" I turned to face him fully, the microphone still in my hand. "Because you told me to leave, Brandon," I said quietly. "You stood on this stage 20 minutes ago and told 300 people that I didn't belong here, that I was a nobody, that I didn't understand your vision." I stepped closer to him. "You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters in this industry. You announced our divorce like it was a victory. You introduced Vanessa as your partner as if I'd never existed. You tried to erase 8 years of my life." My voice was calm, steady, cold. "So I took back what was always mine, the company, the equity, the technology, the future you thought you were building." Brandon stared at me, his eyes hollow, empty. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You wanted me gone," I said. "Now you're the one with nothing." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Brandon's knees buckled again. He grabbed the podium, his breathing ragged, his face crumpling. I didn't mean," he whispered. "Yes, you did," I said simply. I turned back to the audience, my expression calm, composed. For 8 years, I funded this man's life. I gave him capital, co-signed his loans, built his company from the ground up. And tonight he tried to destroy me in the most public, humiliating way possible. I glanced at the screen behind me where the IP acquisition agreement was still displayed, so I made sure he had nothing left to take. The room remained silent. No one moved, no one spoke. I looked at Brandon one last time. He was leaning heavily against the podium, his face pale, his eyes glassy. He looked like a man who'd just realized he'd lost everything that mattered. And he had. But I wasn't done. I turned back to the microphone, my voice calm and clear. "There's one more thing," I said, nodding to Daniel. He pulled up the final slide. "Brandon, there's something I think everyone here needs to see." The screen behind me went dark for a moment, then a video began to play. It was grainy shot from a smartphone, but the audio was crystal clear. And the face on the screen was unmistakable. Brandon Reed sitting in a conference room talking to someone off camera. His voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. "Once we close the Series C and cash out, I'm done. I'll file for divorce, take half of everything, and start fresh. Natalie won't see it coming." The room collectively gasped. Brandon froze, his expression blank with shock. And I smiled. Still wondering why Brandon. I nodded to the tech crew. The screen changed one last time. "Before we end tonight," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I want everyone here to see who Brandon Reed really is." The screen behind me flickered, then displayed a new image, grainy security camera footage. The angle was familiar, Brandon's office at Reed Tech, shot from the camera mounted in the corner near the ceiling. The timestamp in the bottom right corner read July 18, 2024, 4:32 p.m. 4 months ago. The room became preternaturally still, every eye fixed on the screen above. In the video, Brandon sat behind his desk, phone on speaker, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked relaxed, confident, the same arrogant posture I'd watched him adopt 1,000 times over the past 8 years. The office door was open. He knew the camera was recording as company policy required. His voice echoed through the ballroom speakers crystal clear. My wife. She's just a placeholder. I'm keeping her around because divorce is cheap when you file after you've already moved the assets. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Heads turned toward the screen, then toward me, then back to the screen. Brandon's voice continued casual and dismissive. Once this funding round closes and I can cash out some equity, I'm kicking her to the curb. Time for an upgrade. The room went utterly still. No one moved. No one spoke. 300 people sat frozen watching Brandon Reed destroy himself with his own words. On screen, Brandon laughed, a cold, callous sound that echoed through the ballroom. Vanessa's already on board. Younger, hotter, actually ambitious. Not like my wife, who's perfectly happy being a nobody. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the line, then laughed again. Yeah, my wife's completely clueless. She has no idea what I'm actually worth. She thinks we're a team. He shook his head, smirking. A team, can you believe that? And I watched the faces in the audience. The women looked horrified. Several shook their heads slowly, their expressions a mixture of disgust and recognition. A few whispered to their companions, their voices tight with anger. The men looked uncomfortable. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared at their plates as if afraid to meet anyone's eyes. I wondered how many of them had said similar things in private. How many of them were worried their own secrets might come to light. I let the video play for another 10 seconds, then signaled to the tech crew. The screen froze on Brandon's face mid-laugh, his expression smug and cruel. I turned back to the microphone. Funny thing, Brandon, I said, my tone cold and calm. You were right about one thing. You are worthless. I paused, letting that sink in. This video was recorded by the security cameras you personally approved installing in every office. You signed off on the surveillance policy. You knew the cameras were there. You just didn't think anyone would ever use the footage against you. I glanced at the frozen image of Brandon on the screen, then back at the audience. I sent this video to Forbes, TechCrunch, Business Insider, Bloomberg, and the Boston Globe this afternoon. Along with copies of every document we've shown you tonight, the prenup, the loan agreements, the IP acquisition, the board vote, all of it. A murmur spread through the room. A few journalists in the back stood up, pulling out their phones. By tomorrow morning, I continued, my voice steady. Brandon Reed won't just be a former CEO, he'll be a cautionary tale, a case study in how not to treat investors, how not to treat employees, and how not to treat your spouse. I turned to look at Brandon, who was still standing near the edge of the stage, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. You wanted to be famous, Brandon, I said quietly. Congratulations, you will be. For a long moment, no one moved. The ballroom was silent, except for the faint hum of the projector and the distant clink of glassware from the kitchen. Then 2 security guards stepped onto the stage. They didn't touch Brandon roughly. They didn't need to. He didn't resist. He didn't shout or argue or try to defend himself. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, head bowed, looking like a man who'd finally realized there was nothing left to fight for. The guards flanked him on either side and gently guided him toward the stairs. Brandon walked like a ghost, mechanical, empty, defeated. He descended the stage steps slowly, one foot in front of the other, his gaze fixed on the floor. As he walked through the ballroom past the tables where 300 people sat in stunned silence, no one spoke. No one reached out. No one offered comfort or support. They just watched. Every investor, every executive, every colleague who'd ever praised him, celebrated with him, or called him a visionary. They all watched in silence as Brandon Reed, the man who'd stood on that stage an hour ago and humiliated his wife in front of everyone, was escorted out of the ballroom like a criminal. The doors at the back of the room swung open. Brandon disappeared into the hallway beyond, flanked by security, and the doors closed behind him with a soft, final thud. For a heartbeat, the room remained silent. Then it erupted. Not in applause, though a few people did clap, scattered and uncertain, but in chaos, noise, movement. Investors surged toward Daniel Morrison, surrounding him with questions about the company's future, about the revaluation, about what this meant for their portfolios. Journalists rushed toward the stage cameras, flashing voices overlapping as they shouted questions at me. Mrs. Winters, can you comment on? Natalie, what's next for Reed Tech? Do you plan to pursue legal action? I didn't answer, not yet. I stood at the center of the stage alone, the microphone still in my hand. The spotlight above me was hot and bright, casting everything beyond its circle into shadow. This was it, the moment I'd been building toward for 5 months. The moment I'd funded with $4.2 million 8 years ago, even if I hadn't known it yet. Brandon was gone, his reputation destroyed, his company taken, his debts called in, his future reduced to nothing. And I was still standing, alone on the stage under the spotlight, exactly where I belonged. I set the microphone down gently on the podium and looked out at the ballroom, at the chaos, the journalists, the investors, the people who would tell this story for years to come. Tomorrow, the world would know what Brandon Reed had tried to do to me, and they would know that I had won. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked off the stage. The spotlight followed me all the way to the door. The applause started with one person, then 5, then 50, then the entire room. 300 people rose to their feet, filling the ballroom with the sound of clapping hands, the steady rhythm building like thunder. It wasn't polite applause, the kind you give at the end of a corporate presentation. It was raw, emotional, cathartic. The kind of applause that comes when people have just witnessed something they didn't know they needed to see. The women were the loudest. Some of them were crying, tears streaming down their faces as they clapped, nodding at me as if to say yes. Thank you. Finally. A few raised their fists in solidarity, a silent gesture of power and recognition. They understood. They'd lived versions of this story themselves, maybe not on this scale, but enough to know what it felt like to be erased, dismissed, underestimated. The men were more subdued. Some clapped along, their expressions carefully neutral. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, avoiding eye contact. I wondered how many of them saw a reflection of Brandon in themselves. How many had said things in private they hoped would never come to light. The journalists pushed forward, cameras, flashing microphones thrust toward me. Mrs. Winters, can we get a statement? Natalie, what's next for Reed Tech? Do you have any message for other women in similar situations? I held up one hand and the room quieted just enough for me to speak. Tonight was about truth. I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping into my bones. Brandon chose to humiliate me publicly. I responded with facts, documents, evidence, and I don't regret a single moment of it. I paused, letting that settle. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you. The applause surged again as I stepped away from the podium. A few people called out questions, but I didn't answer. I'd said everything I needed to say. As I descended the stage steps, a figure approached from the side. Vanessa Sterling. She looked composed, professional, her expression calm, despite everything that had just unfolded. Mrs. Winters, she said quietly, extending her hand. It was an honor to work with you. I shook her hand, feeling the firmness of her grip. You played your part perfectly, I said. Vanessa smiled, a small, genuine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Wishing you all the best, she said. I'm heading to New York next week, starting fresh. Good luck, I said, and I meant it. She nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the crowd. Daniel appeared at my side a moment later, his hand gently guiding me toward a side exit away from the press. Come on, he said quietly. Let's get you out of here. We slipped through a service hallway and out a back door where his car was waiting. The driver opened the door and I slid into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin. Daniel climbed in beside me and the door closed, muffling the noise of the ballroom behind us. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at my hands in my lap. Then the adrenaline crash hit. It wasn't tears. Not yet. Just a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion that made my limbs feel heavy and my chest tight. I leaned back against the seat and closed my eyes, letting out a slow, shaky breath. You were magnificent, Daniel said quietly. I opened my eyes and looked at him. I was terrifying, I said. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression. Sometimes, he said, the second is the first. I managed a faint laugh, though it felt more like a release of tension than real humor. My phone buzzed in my purse, then again, then continuously vibrating so hard I could hear it through the leather. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Messages flooded in, dozens of them, texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, colleagues from my old accounting firm, former classmates, distant relatives. Congratulations, you were incredible. That took guts. I'm proud of you. Then messages from strangers, people I didn't know but who'd somehow gotten my number, offers for interviews, requests for speaking engagements. Words of support from women who said they'd lived through similar situations. I scrolled through them, my vision blurring slightly from the sheer volume. And then I saw it. A message from my mother. I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Your grandmother would be too. You stood up for yourself. You fought back. And you won. I love you." The tears I'd been holding back all night finally broke through. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to stifle the sob that rose in my chest. But it came anyway, quiet, shaking, real. The first tears I'd shed all evening. Not tears of anger or grief, but of release. Of relief. Daniel didn't say anything. He just sat beside me, silent and steady, giving me the space to fall apart. It took a few minutes for the tears to stop. When they did, I wiped my face with the back of my hand and took a deep, steadying breath. "Sorry," I murmured. "Don't be," Daniel said simply. The car pulled up in front of my building, the penthouse in Back Bay, that I'd co-signed for the one that would soon legally be mine once Brandon defaulted on his loans. The driver opened the door and I stepped out into the cool November night. Daniel walked me to the entrance. "You going to be okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Call me if you need anything." "I will. Thank you, Daniel, for everything." He squeezed my shoulder once, then turned and walked back to the car. I rode the elevator up to the 20th floor in silence, the hum of the machinery the only sound. When the doors opened, I stepped into the penthouse, empty, quiet, dimly lit by the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Brandon's things were still there, his clothes hanging in the closet, his laptop on the kitchen counter, his golf clubs propped in the corner of the entryway. Signs of a life he'd been living thinking he was untouchable. But Brandon himself wasn't there. And for the first time in 8 years, the absence didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. I walked to the windows and looked out over the city, the lights of Boston stretching out in all directions, tiny and infinite all at once. Somewhere out there, Brandon was probably in a hotel room or a friend's couch or his lawyer's office, trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of his life. But I wasn't thinking about him anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the company I would rebuild, about the technology I now owned, about the women who would see my story and know that they didn't have to stay silent. I pressed my palm against the cool glass and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Really breathe. And I wasn't afraid anymore. The media cycle lasted 3 weeks. My name became a verb, don't Brandon read someone. It showed up in think pieces, business school case studies, and even a Saturday Night Live sketch. The internet had decided I was either a hero or a villain depending on who you asked. I didn't care. I'd told the truth, and the truth didn't need my defense. Week 1 was a blur. Forbes put me on the cover with the headline, "The $4.2 million Revenge: How Natalie Winters Took Back Her Company." I did 3 interviews, declined a dozen more, and spent most of my time fielding calls from lawyers, investors, and journalists who wanted to know what came next. Week 2, I made the announcement. Reed Tech Solutions was dead. In its place, Donovan Technologies. Donovan was my middle name, my grandmother's maiden name, the name attached to the inheritance that had built everything Brandon thought was his. The rebrand was immediate, total, and unapologetic. Week 3. I hired Patricia Williams as the new CEO. She was 52, a former vice president at Google, and one of the most respected executives in the industry. I'd reached out to her the day after the gala, and she'd said yes within 48 hours. I would remain board chair, handling strategic oversight, but I had no interest in running day-to-day operations. I'd spent 8 years building someone else's empire. It was time to build my own life. By December, the culture at Donovan Technologies had shifted entirely. Respect, transparency, work-life balance. I implemented policies Brandon would have called soft, flexible hours, mental health days, mandatory parental leave. The employees, especially the women, visibly relaxed. People smiled more, stayed later because they wanted to, not because they were afraid. January brought results. Revenue was up 35%. New clients flooded in, many of them explicitly saying they wanted to work with the woman from that gala night. Investors who'd pulled out under Brandon's leadership came back, checkbooks open. Donovan Technologies wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. In February, I adopted a dog. Cooper was a 3-year-old golden retriever I found at a rescue shelter, all floppy ears and gentle eyes. He'd been abandoned by his previous owner and spent 6 months in the shelter before I brought him home. He followed me everywhere, slept at the foot of my bed, and had a habit of resting his head on my lap when I worked late. For the first time in years, the penthouse didn't feel empty. March was for renovations. I gutted the penthouse, new furniture, new art, new colors. I erased every trace of Brandon. The leather couch he'd insisted on gone, the minimalist gray walls he'd loved, painted a warm, soft cream. The oversized TV he'd used to watch sports, replaced with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. By the time the contractors finished, the space was entirely mine. It felt lighter, freer. I didn't follow Brandon's life closely, but news filtered through anyway. He'd moved to Austin, Texas, took a job as a regional sales manager for a small software company no one had heard of. His salary was 1/8 of what he used to make. He lived in a studio apartment, drove a used Honda, and kept a low profile. A few people sent me screenshots of his LinkedIn profile, updated with a vague job title and a photo where he looked tired, older, diminished. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt nothing. Brandon was no longer part of my story. April brought recognition I hadn't sought but appreciated nonetheless. Forbes released their annual 40 Most Powerful Women in Tech list. I was number 37. The profile was generous, highlighting Donovan Technologies' growth, my leadership style, and the public stand I'd taken at the gala. My mother called crying happy tears. My grandmother would have been proud, she said. I believed her. In May, Daniel Morrison asked me to dinner. Not as a business partner. Not as the man who'd helped orchestrate the most public takedown Boston had seen in years, just as a friend. Still just friends, he'd said when he invited me, unless you want it to be more. I wasn't ready for more, not yet. But we went to dinner anyway, a quiet Italian place in the North End, far from the tech crowd and the journalists who still occasionally tried to corner me for a quote. We talked about everything and nothing. He made me laugh. I realized somewhere between the appetizer and dessert that I'd forgotten what it felt like to relax around someone, to not be performing, to just exist. I'm not looking for anything serious, I told him as we walked to my car. I know, he said, that's okay. And it was. 6 months after the gala, I sat in my office overlooking Boston. The city stretched out below me, lights flickering in the dusk. Cooper was asleep under my desk, his soft snores the only sound in the room. Donovan Technologies was valued at $120 million. Clients were happy, employees were thriving. I'd rebuilt everything Brandon had tried to destroy, and I'd done it better. My phone buzzed on the desk. An email notification. I glanced at the sender, Brandon Reed. Subject line, I'm sorry. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For a moment, just a moment, I considered opening it, reading whatever excuse or apology or plea he'd written, seeing if there was anything left of the man I'd once loved. Then I deleted it. Some apologies come too late. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city again. Cooper shifted under the desk, his tail thumping softly against the floor. My phone buzzed again, this time a text. Daniel, dinner tonight, still just friends. Unless you want more. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I smiled, small, genuine, real. Maybe I was ready. Or maybe I wasn't. But for the first time in 8 years, I had the freedom to decide for myself. I picked up my phone and started typing. People ask me if I feel guilty, if I regret destroying my husband's life in front of 300 people. I'm sitting in my office overlooking Boston when they ask journalists, podcasters, people who want to turn my story into a lesson, or a cautionary tale, or a viral moment. Cooper is curled under my desk, his soft breathing the only sound in the room. Outside, the city stretches out beneath a June sky, bright and clear. Do I feel guilty? I think about that question more than I probably should. I feel guilty for spending years making myself smaller so Brandon could feel bigger. I feel guilty for letting a man who cheated on me, lied to me, and planned to discard me dictate how I saw myself. I feel guilty for not walking away sooner. But destroying his empire, because it wasn't his empire, it was mine. I built Reed Tech from the ground up with $4.2 million I earned through my grandmother's hard work and sacrifice. I funded every product launch, every expansion, every milestone Brandon celebrated as his own. I co-signed his loans. I routed capital through shell companies so he could play the role of visionary CEO while I stayed invisible. And when he stood on that stage and told 300 people I didn't belong there, he wasn't just humiliating me. He was erasing 8 years of my life, my labor, my sacrifice, my risk. So no, I don't feel guilty for taking back what was always mine, but I've learned a few things along the way. Lessons I wish someone had told me when I was 28 years old signing a prenup and signing over my entire inheritance to a man I trusted. Know your worth. Not what someone else tells you you're worth. Not what society says you should settle for. What you actually bring to the table. Your skills, your capital, your intelligence, your time. All of it has value. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Protect your assets. Legally, financially, emotionally. Put your name on things. Sign contracts. Hire lawyers. Don't assume love is enough to keep someone honest. It's not. Never let someone make you feel small. If you're in a relationship where you're constantly shrinking yourself, your ambitions, your voice, your presence to make someone else comfortable, you're not in a partnership. You're in a cage. And here's the big one. If someone tells you to leave, take everything that's yours when you go. Don't leave quietly. Don't let them rewrite history. Don't let them pretend they built what you funded. Take what you earned, what you sacrificed for, what you're legally entitled to. Because kindness without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-destruction. I hear things about Brandon occasionally. Mutual acquaintances mention him in passing, usually with a mix of pity and schadenfreude. He's apparently trying to date again. But every woman he meets Googles him first. They find the Forbes article, the videos from the gala, the case studies and business ethics courses. His reputation follows him everywhere. And that's not my revenge. That's the consequence of his actions. I didn't ruin Brandon Reed's life. He did. I just made sure everyone knew the truth. Vanessa Sterling is thriving in New York. She landed her dream job at a top-tier consulting firm, exactly the kind of position I promised her. We exchange messages occasionally, professional, friendly, nothing more. She played her part perfectly, and I'll always respect her for that. Daniel and I are taking things slow. Slower than I expected, honestly. But he's patient. He doesn't push. He doesn't try to fix me or save me or turn our relationship into some grand narrative. He just sees me, the real me, not the version I had to perform for Brandon, not the woman who stood on that stage and dismantled her husband piece by piece, just Natalie. For the first time in a decade, I'm with someone who respects me, who listens when I talk, who doesn't need me to be smaller so he can feel bigger. And it's terrifying and exhilarating and completely different from anything I've ever known. People ask if I'm against love now, if I've sworn off relationships, built walls too high for anyone to climb. I'm not against love. I'm against settling for less than respect. There's a difference. Last week, Donovan Technologies closed a $50 million funding round. Investors are calling it one of the most successful turnarounds in Boston tech history. The company is valued at over $200 million now. My personal net worth is $85 million. I didn't plan to become wealthy. I planned to reclaim the millions I'd risked on a man who never saw my worth. The wealth is just a byproduct of refusing to let someone erase me. My phone rings while I'm reviewing the quarterly financials. Daniel's name flashes on the screen. Saw the news, he says when I pick up. Congrats, boss. His tone is teasing warm. I smile despite myself. Thanks, dinner tonight. Absolutely. I hang up and lean back in my chair looking out at the city. Cooper stretches under the desk, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. I think about the gala, about standing under those lights while Brandon tried to destroy me, about the moment Daniel stepped onto that stage and the entire room shifted. Brandon told me I didn't belong there. He was right. I didn't belong in his world, a world built on lies, arrogance, and the belief that some people matter more than others. A world where women are placeholders, and success means stepping on everyone who helped you climb. I belonged in my world, bigger, more honest, entirely mine. And the thing is, I didn't destroy Brandon's life to prove a point. I didn't do it for revenge or vindication or to become a headline. I did it because he left me no choice. When someone tells you to leave, when they publicly humiliate you and erase your contributions and treat you like you're worthless, you have two options. You can walk away quietly, let them keep everything you built, and spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd fought back. Or you can take what's yours. Reclaim your story, stand in the spotlight, and refuse to apologize for being powerful. I chose the second option, and I'd choose it again. Good thing he told me to leave. And I did, straight to the top. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's building yours so well they can't do anything but stand at the bottom and look up. And to you listening to this story, remember this. I am not asking you to follow my path of family revenge. God teaches us to forgive, but he also asks us to honor our worth. I chose family revenge not once, but calculated every step because betrayal cut deeper than any blade. When family betrayal happens, you have a choice: disappear quietly or reclaim your power. My advice? Don't be like me if you can help it. But if you must be smarter, document everything. Trust your instincts. The wound of family betrayal never fully heals, but accountability brings peace. This journey taught me that family revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about truth. Family betrayal thrives in silence, exposure kills it. I used family revenge as a scalpel, not a sword cutting away lies to reveal bone-deep reality. Call to action. If this story resonated, please comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling narratives. Thank you for following this journey to the end. Please note, upcoming stories contain fictional elements created for educational purposes. If this content doesn't suit you, feel free to explore other options.